Welcome, Spooky Squad, to another episode of Scary Bytes, brought to you by Spooky Hound. I'm Sarge, your guide into the unknown, the unexplained, and the unforgettable. Each week, we explore bite-sized terrors that will linger long after you turn out the lights. Tonight's theme, creatures that walk the line between human and beast. We're diving into unsettling encounters with Dogmen, stories so chilling they'll make you second guess every shadow in the woods. Get comfy, turn up the volume, and remember, the night has eyes, my friends. First up, we head to Michigan, the birthplace of one of the most legendary Dogman sightings in the United States. This one's called the Lumberjack's Terror. Sarah always thought her grandfather's old logging stories were just that, stories. But when she inherited his cabin in the woods of Wexford County, Michigan, she found something that would change her view forever. Late one evening, as a storm rolled in, Sarah decided to light the fireplace and delve into her grandfather's journals. Most of the entries were routine accounts of logging life, but one, dated June 1887, stood out. In shaky handwriting, he described an encounter that had haunted him for years. He and a fellow lumberjack were returning to camp after a long day's work when they heard rustling in the bush. Thinking it was a bear, they stood their ground, ready to scare it off. But what emerged wasn't a bear. It was a towering figure, covered in matted fur, with a snarling canine's face. Its eyes glue unnaturally in the dim light, and it moved with a terrifying intelligence, circling them as if deciding which one to strike first. My grandfather wrote, it wasn't an animal, it wasn't a man, it was something in between. Sarah dismissed it as a tale, a tall one at that, until one night she heard growling outside her window. What she saw in the shadows matched her grandfather's descriptions perfectly. A beast, standing upright, its eyes glowing through the darkness. She fled the cabin that night, never to return. Was Sarah's grandfather recounting an actual encounter? Or was it just folklore? Either way, the Michigan Dogman has been spotted for over a century, and many believe it still stalks the forest to this day. Let's head south for our next story, where a road trip in Texas turned into a nightmare. This one's called the Highway Stalker. This tale takes us to Wisconsin, along a lonely stretch of road known for eerie things. It was the summer of 2003, and our storyteller, who we'll call Chris, was making a long drive home after visiting family. The clock had just ticked past midnight, and the air was thick with an oppressive silence, broken only by the hum of his car's engine. Chris had driven this route dozens of times before, but something about this night felt off. It began as a faint sensation, a feeling of being watched. He adjusted his rear view mirror, brushing it off as paranoia, only to catch a glimpse of two glowing yellow eyes. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, maybe a reflection from an animal in the woods. But these eyes, they weren't stationary. They were moving and keeping pace with his car at 55 miles an hour. Chris's pulse quickened. His logical mind wrestled with what his sensors were screaming, that something unnatural was out there. He rolled up the windows and turned on the high beams, scanning the road ahead. For a moment, the eyes disappeared, and he let out a shaky breath. But just as he began to relax, a shadow darted across the road, illuminating for a split second in his headlights. What he saw defied explanation. The creature was enormous, standing at least 7 feet tall, with long limbs that moved unsettlingly fluidly. Its head was distinct, wolf-like, but its body, it doesn't make sense. It walked upright like a man. Chris slammed on the gas, pushing his old sedan to its limits. The creature didn't hesitate. It gave chase, its muscular legs propelling it forward at a terrifying speed. Despite the car's growing velocity, the Dogman gained ground, its claws scraping against the rear bumper in a screech that made Chris's hair stand on end. Panicking, Chris swerved into the middle of the road, hoping to shake it off. Instead, the beast lunged, slamming its body into the side of the car with a force that sent the vehicle fishtailing. For a heart-stopping moment, Chris fought to keep control, gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. As he straightened out, he glanced at the passenger side window and nearly screamed. The Dogman was there, running alongside the car. Its yellow eyes bore into him, filled with a malevolent intelligence. Its lips curled back, revealing rows of sharp, gleaming teeth. And then it snarled, a guttural, bone-chilling sound that Chris swore he felt in his chest. In a desperate move, Chris jerked the wheel, veering into the opposite lane. The sudden shift in direction seemed to throw the creature off. It stumbled briefly before disappearing into the woods. Chris didn't stop until he reached the next gas station, where he shakily exited the car to inspect the damage. Deep, parallel gouges ran along the side of the vehicle, evidence that what he'd encountered wasn't a hallucination. Later, when recounting the experience, Chris learned he wasn't alone. Over the years, other drivers reported similar encounters along that same stretch of road. Some described the same glowing eyes and hulking figure, while others spoke of hearing unearthly howls that seemed to follow their vehicles. Locals began calling the area Dogman Alley. Skeptics dismissed the stories as tall tales, but Chris knew what he saw, and to this day, he refuses to drive that road alone after dark. Well, they say the Dogman is a territorial creature, protecting its domain with ferocity. But what if it's more than that? What if it's not just watching, but hunting? We may never know for sure, but one thing's certain. Next time you're driving down a quiet highway, you might want to keep your eyes on the shadows. Let's roll into our next story. Truck driver encounter. The year was 2017. Lauren Barger, a seasoned truck driver with decades of experience, thought he'd seen it all. Hauling freight through Michigan's dense forests late at night was routine until that drive. It started with a shadow, massive and unmissable, darting across the road in the peripheral of his headlights. Lauren hit the brakes, heart racing, as the creature emerged from the darkness. Standing upright in the middle of the road was a beast, unlike anything he'd ever seen, at least 8 feet tall. Its body heavily muscled and covered in coarse fur. What stood out most were its hands, not paws, but hands, long, clawed, and disturbingly human. The Dogman's sharp, white teeth gleamed under the headlights as it emitted a guttural growl. Acting on instinct and sheer adrenaline, Lauren grabbed his rifle, rolled down the window, and fired. The creature let out a blood-curdling howl and vanished into the forest. Shaken, but determined to investigate, Lauren drove to the spot and found bloody trails leading into the woods. But before he could follow, the scene was swarmed by men in unmarked vehicles. Federal agents, or so they claimed. The men confiscated his dash cam footage and warned him to stay quiet, declaring the creature as one of their assets. Lauren's encounters sparked debates in online forums, splitting opinions between skeptics and conspiracy theorists. Some dismiss his story as pure fabrication, while others argue it's evidence of a government cover-up, a secret program hiding cryptid experiments or biological anomalies from the public. So, was Lauren Barger just a storyteller? Or did he stumble upon something the rest of us weren't meant to know? Chilling, isn't it? Whether you believe Lauren's story or not, one thing's for sure. The roads at night can hold more than just potholes and deer. Up next, we'll be talking about the Shadow Pack. We venture into the heart of Michigan's wilderness, again, a land known for its thick forests and deep, shadowy secrets. In 2016, a group of campers out in the woods near a remote part of the state found themselves face to face with something they could neither explain nor survive. Their story is one that continues to haunt those who hear it. A tale that no one will forget once they've heard the words, the Shadow Pack. The group of 6 friends had been out on a week-long camping trip, eager to leave behind the stress of daily life and enjoy some quiet, starry nights around the campfire. On their second night, they set up a camp in a small clearing deep in the woods, unaware that something had already noticed their presence. It started with a rustling noise coming from the trees just beyond their campfire's reach. At first, they thought it was just the wind or perhaps a deer, but as the minutes ticked by, the rustling grew louder, and then came to a stop. The woods fell into an unnatural silence. One of the campers, Jake, decided to go investigate. He grabbed a flashlight, his hand trembling with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. As he ventured deeper into the darkness, their air grew colder. Suddenly, he saw them. 2 pairs of glowing yellow eyes staring back at him from the underbrush. The light flickered, revealing the massive hunched shapes that moved with a terrifying speed. It was too late to run. Jake's scream echoed through the forest as the creatures lunged toward him. Back at camp, his friends heard his cries and rushed into the woods to find him. What they discovered left them in shock. Jake's flashlight was lying on the ground, its beam illuminating nothing but trees. But Jake, he was gone. The group spent the rest of the night huddled together, hearing the unmistakable sounds of something large circling their camp. The trees creaked, and they could hear the creatures breathing, heavy, ragged, hungry, just out of sight. As dawn broke, the group rushed to leave, hoping the nightmare would end with the daylight. But the woods, they seemed to watch them as they packed up, their every move shadowed by the unseen creatures. When they finally made it back to their cars, their faces were pale, their bodies shaking, and their minds racing with disbelief. They couldn't explain what they had encountered that night. Some believed it was a pack of wild dogs. Others thought it was something far more sinister. Months later, one of the campers, now alone and deeply disturbed, returned to the woods, determined to uncover the truth. He ventured back to the clearing where they had camped, only to find it was gone. Completely gone. The trees were marked with deep claw scratches, and the ground was disturbed, as if something large had been pacing the area for weeks. But the most disturbing thing, a series of large, human-like footprints leading into the dense forest where the shadows seem to never end. The final question still lingers. What exactly had the group encountered? Was it truly the Dogman or something else? Some say it was an entire pack of these creatures, hunting their prey under the cover of darkness. Others whisper that it was a single, relentless beast tracking them even after they fled. What is certain is that the Shadow Pack is real, and they still roam, waiting for their next victims. Well now, as you head off into your night, remember, sometimes the things we fear are the shadows that follow us from the dark. And there are some things that when you look back, you pray you don't see. Thank you for joining us tonight. This has been Scary Bytes, brought to you by Spooky Hound. If you enjoyed this, please feel free to subscribe and stay a while. And if you have a story you'd like us to read or turn into a video, feel free to email us at bytehound with a Y at gmail.com. Once again, I'm Sarge. And until next time, keep your eyes sharp. Who knows what lurks just beyond the shadows? Good night.